Lee with the E-Marketing Association. Here at DigiMarCon New England with Matt Raven, who just finished a talk. He's now with Dig and Dig. So, what was your talk on?
Talk was on content optimization. So really, uh, the main goal was to break down the technical barriers that people typically associate with how to SEO optimize content that they have that's currently existing or that they're thinking about generating, um, for the purposes of just making really subtle tweaks to existing workflows and overall get more people engaging with that material.
So, one of the things that used to work in SEO back in the early days, and I've been doing SEO since 1994, did it in 96. So, this was way pre Google. It was, keyword stuffing. Now,
Yeah.
uh, more recently, we found that the more authentic the content is and the more it flows, the more it sort of feeds the AI,
Yeah.
not just Google and Bing's crawler. So, how should people think about content from the perspective of, perhaps relying on AI a little bit as a crutch to come up
Yep.
with ideation of ideas to actually going full force and having AI create content? Or is that really a no-no in your eyes?
I mean, I think it really depends, is the short answer. And really go back to your first question there. I think there's more that doesn't work than does work. So you got to be awfully careful. And I could probably get an education from you, given your experience. But the question of AI is obviously a hot topic. Google, I think, and the other search engines have been so early to it that people forget they've been using AI and machine learning in their algorithms for 8 to 10 years, right? In
Right.
some cases, right? So this isn't new to them, but how they bring that to the end user and to the front end experience is, right? So I think, in terms of how we consult our clients to use generative AI, it is okay to support the ideation process, to ask questions about the utility of content that you've already created. For
Mhm.
instance, does this work? Is this satisfying the intent behind these various keywords? Um, to really gauge that and to get a second opinion on it. It's also good in certain cases to scale your optimization efforts. So it's now much easier to plug in a 600-word blog post and say, write me a best practice based meta description for this to entice
Right.
clicks. So we would never encourage anybody to copy paste, but it is a great starting point to really scale the efforts of your team. And we are full stop against using the tool for end to end content creation. So not write a blog post on this or a web page on this or a landing page on this and just pulling that directly onto the website, because it's void of all things strategy, all things audience. But it is really, I sort of envision it as an extension of your team, right? A free hire, so to speak. So we encourage everybody to use it safely and strategically.
So I've had the, I guess, privilege or curse to have been involved in SEO since before Google was even founded, and I've gotten to see every single one of their updates.
Yeah,
Right, one of the more recent ones that hit last year was the helpful content
yeah,
update, which is really aptly named, right? Because if you sort of put yourself into the mind of the Google engineer, they don't want content out there that's not helpful.
right.
And what's interesting about AI generated content is because it's so regurgitated,
Yep,
it's sometimes not helpful.
yep,
So I think that that's like a warning shot across the bow of
agreed.
content creators
Yep,
to sort of say, listen, think about how much value you're
yeah,
adding to the ecosystem before you go out and spew
yeah,
content into the internet. And interestingly, I also like to think of myself, imagining that I'm facing the conundrum of a Google engineer, and like, what kinds of content would I look to not only feed my general index, but to feed my LLM?
yeah,
And I actually think content like this,
yeah,
right, transcribed,
yeah,
is fully authentic, right? It's
exactly.
co-created content. We're here having a conversation
Yeah,
about content creation, and it's going out into the ether and
yeah,
perhaps being recorded on the
yeah,
DigiMarCon
yeah,
YouTube channel. Well, Google sees the transcript of those YouTube channels, right?
yeah,
And I'm of the opinion that, like, the fact that you can get double duty out of co-created content for
yeah,
social media,
yeah.
social proof, social activation, and oh, by the way, it's probably good for SEO. I feel like marketers don't understand how much mileage they can get out of great
Such a
content.
good idea. Yeah, I think, even still to this day, people's first instinct when they think of SEO is written editorial content.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And by and large, it still is the format that receives the most clicks, but that's really more of a product of the disproportionate amount of it today.
Right.
Right. So that's a really good point about video, about streaming audio, right? We've seen the insurgence of podcasts.
Sure.
How is that going to continue to translate? I think it's important to call back on Google's business model, right? It's predicated on delivering user value and in many cases keeping them there. Ideally, hush hush. Hopefully they have to pay for that traffic. But tools like this, right? You would think, if you take a step back, it delivers on everything that they are publicly deeming as valuable.
Right.
It's people with experience, authentically connecting in real time about topics that matter to the end user, right? So if they deliver on that promise, I think we'll start to see more of these formats integrated into SERPs. And look, they're also now competing with YouTube, with TikTok, with ChatGPT as other starting points for people's user journeys. So if they can't adapt to those formats quickly, they could lose market share.
Well, I mean, obviously, Google owns YouTube, right?
Yep.
So it's the second largest search
Yep.
engine, right? Is a video search
Yep.
engine. And whether you're a conspiracy theorist or just a pragmatist, because Google wants to delight the searcher,
Yeah.
sometimes it'll go ahead and put that video content right there in the regular SERP.
Yep.
Right. So for those folks who are like, oh, I'm in the accounting business, my content is too boring.
Yep.
Well, not if I have to understand the nuances of LIFO versus FIFO, and I'm in the business of managing inventory that
That's exactly
expires.
right. Yeah.
Right. To somebody, that content might be super important,
Absolutely.
and I feel like people are sometimes a little reticent to jump into content creation, especially video content creation, if they're not comfortable on camera.
Yeah.
But you can sort of do enough practice to where you're comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And so, or at least find somebody within the company who is comfortable and designate them as the evangelist, right? And send them out.
That's right. That's right. I think a good middle ground too, if you're not ready to take that full leap, right, is make sure that the content that you're producing, if it is editorial heavy, make sure it's got some element of multimedia on the page.
Sure.
Right. This whole concept of intent, we can't assume that everybody prefers to consume content by reading large chunks of information, right? And there's been progress made towards that. People becoming more concise, really focused on word count, really focused on UX and CRO. But I think we have to start creating pages that span the intent that we're trying to capture of the search terms, but also have different types of formats on page, so that if I'm somebody who wants to have somebody basically read the salient points of a blog post to me in a 20-second video, I have that. And if you're the person who wants to read and skim, you have that as well. So we can satisfy that in different ways as a stepping stone.
Yeah, I think that sort of leads into sort of the natural mindset of thinking about where should the content live too, right? Because maybe it shouldn't all live on your blog, right? Maybe it should live all over the place.
Yeah.
Because, and it may be in a different format. Maybe when it's up on LinkedIn, it's abstracting the content which you had on your site. And it's just one more place for the LLM to encounter it.
Yep.
Because there was I don't think they call it this anymore, but back in sort of the mid days of SEO, there's a concept called barnacle SEO. This idea like, well, I want to get my domain to rank, but I would love to actually clutter as much of the SERP with as much positive content about me as possible.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, that strategy feeds the LLM.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The more people who are speaking highly about a brand and talking about the problems the brand's product or service solves, the more likely the AI is to say, oh, yeah, that's exactly how to clog a drain that's filled with hair and gunk, right? So, I feel like marketers really have to double down on the content.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good point. I don't think it's a question people ask enough. My opinion is I start from an ideal state to keep control of all the elements as a starting point. Let's try to prove to me otherwise that this shouldn't live on our site or something that we own, right?
Yeah, sure.
And that's because we're going to get the most long-term benefit for it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't repurpose it for other channels. But there are a lot of reasons why something shouldn't live on our site. Something I talked about in the session was people do exhaustive, they'll spend hours and hours and hours doing keyword research, and they won't even consider performing those searches to look at the SERP, right? Well,
Right.
Google is showing us firsthand what they're ranking,
Yeah.
right? Don't think that you're going to own a topic by publishing a blog post if everything Google is ranked in the top 15 is review platforms and third-party publishers. That might be an option to take to your contributed content strategy or your PR
Absolutely.
strategy, right?
Yeah.
So take the information that Google is quite literally giving you and bake that into your content strategy.
Yeah, you're right that people forget to look at the competitive landscape
Yeah.
and the context of, you know, if you and I went out and raised $1 billion to
Yeah.
start a travel company, we wanted to compete with Expedia.
Sounds fun.
Could we rank in Google anytime soon? Wouldn't matter how deep our pockets are,
Absolutely.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, it'd be like starting the New York Marathon an hour late.
Exactly.
You're just not going to be able to run
Exactly.
fast enough. So that's actually apropos to startups or companies earlier in their life cycle. They should really think through, okay, great, I'll put this content on my site, but where can similar content be that might rank a little sooner, right? My
Mhm.
site, if I do great at SEO and I'm in a category where it is achievable,
Yep.
unlike us displacing Expedia with our $1 billion,
Yep.
um, you know, if it is achievable, it should be aspirational. You should do your
Yeah.
best and start from the long tail, work your way towards the head on your content. But having a digital PR strategy, can
Massively
maybe
important.
get you some of the way there with those other locations
Yeah.
for sure.
In those situations, my recommendation is don't stop publishing on your own site
Right.
because of fear of screaming into the wilderness and nobody being there, because you have to start somewhere,
Of
right?
course.
We know SEO is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
long game. You
Yeah.
got to start somewhere. But in your distribution plan, right, for all of that content, you've really got to lean into the existing communities that are built that are relevant to that and building partnerships with them, because without that, you're not going to get the short-term gain, right? So it has to, the on-page work that we're doing, everything that we're publishing on site has to be complemented with people that have credibility, that have that audience, that can deliver that authority on behalf of your brand
Absolutely.
while you're up and coming. Really important.
So one final topic. One area that sort of bridges between sort of paid media and earned media is influencers,
Yeah.
right? And influencers create content. And of course, the Federal Trade Commission would love for every piece of influencer content that was even remotely influenced
Yeah.
to be properly tagged. But if, I buy somebody dinner, I'm not sure that
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
necessarily be enough
Yeah.
to result in the ad hashtag
Disclosures. Yeah.
or disclosure.
Yeah.
But that said, it's part of an overall mix, a digital content
Yeah.
mix. So should that be sort of a collaborative effort between the paid media and sort of the digital content
Yeah.
team?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. So, again, going back to that point, the reason that brands work with influencers, right, is because they have existing communities
Right.
that these brands would love to tap into. And you tend to be able to do it in more of a cost effective manner than reaching those audiences through different paid channels, as an example, right? What you have to be really careful of is, 15 years ago, and I've done a lot of work in this space at an agency of old, the concept of authentic really rung true. Now, right, everybody's much savvier. They can see through this. They understand that this is really a marketing channel, right?
Yeah.
So I think you've got to be awfully careful about the people you choose to work with. Ideally, they haven't done a lot of work in your space, but they still have credibility in a parallel category, right? Because I question how much value are you getting long term if you are just the fourth brand in your category to be written about by this person,
Right.
right? That's kind of just a rip and replace strategy. I think where paid comes in is ideally when you're contracting these influencers, you should own the rights to the content into perpetuity, and you can take that content and use that to fuel your paid media strategy, right?
For
Because it's one thing for Dig and Dig, our brand, to say, hire us for your SEO services, we're the best. It's another thing if a client of mine can testify to the partnership that they've gained and the results that we've driven, right? That's going to lead to so much more impact downstream, way more than we could ever do just from shouting through our own echo chamber. So I think paid should be able to leverage those influencer relationships by taking that content and getting it in front of your direct ICP.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great topic. Great points. Thanks for sharing
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
And look forward to continuing the conversation.
Great. Thanks for having me.